All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. And we at the Network for Educator Effectiveness are very excited to have you with us on this Friday morning. So thank you very much. Really excited to be offering this webinar today and the learning that we'll be going through today with Dr. Leigh Neier. As you can see on the slide being shared with you right now, the topic today is Teach by Design. How might we move from what is to what could be? And again, that is going to be a discussion, a presentation that Dr. Neier is going to lead. I want to talk a little bit about Leigh here, and then I will hand it over to her, and we will get started with the morning ahead. Dr. Leigh Neier is an associate teaching professor in the Department of Learning, Teaching, and Curriculum at the University of Missouri, and she also serves as the Director of Elementary Education. Her coursework centers upon best practices in pedagogy and school health and student well-being, including social and emotional learning and empathy. Leigh is a three-time graduate of the University of Missouri, is a University of Missouri System Presidential Engagement Fellow, and the winner of multiple prestigious awards. I could take about the next hour just to list all the awards she's won the past few years. She is also one of the most positive, one of the most exuberant people that I have the pleasure of knowing, and I'd love the chance to hear her talk when afforded it, and I look forward to what she says today. I hope you all do as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Leigh Neier. Leigh, thank you very much for being here, and we are happy to be learning with you today.
Well, thank you, Tom. I really do appreciate this opportunity, especially on a Friday morning, to join with so many educators and administrators throughout the state. So, Tom, thank you, Kendra, Curtis, and Terry. I really appreciate the invitation to be here. And hello to everyone who's logged in to join us today. We're going to talk a little bit about a method and a mindset that's called design thinking. And in doing so, I hope that I will give you all a few strategies, a few tools that you can use to think about some small changes that you may want to make, whether it's to your teaching practice or just to maybe from a school culture standpoint. So we're going to think about this being an opportune time to make some small change by design. So that's really where we'll head this morning. Before we dive right in, though, I do want to just take a quick second here to say thank you so much to all of you who are serving our state, our students, our communities, our families during this such an unprecedented time. I know certainly we continue to hear about the unsung heroes in our medical professions, in the service industries, the food and restaurant businesses, but it's always so humbling to see that teachers are also being recognized for the incredible work that they're doing to stay connected to their communities right now. So I really appreciate that from a standpoint of teacher education, which is the business that we're in at the University of Missouri and the College of Education. I can't think of a better time for our future teachers, our future educators. There's not been a better time for us to say, look at how incredible these professionals are and how important you are to the community. So I really do thank you for the example that you set all of the time, but right now all eyes are on this profession, and we are so proud to have so many fine educators in the state of Missouri. So I really do appreciate your service. So just a few quick tidbits about myself. Maybe you can tell by my background, my attire for today. I love the University of Missouri. Tom mentioned that I have 3 degrees from Mizzou. It is such an honor to be a full-time faculty member at the College of Education, working with so many incredible colleagues, our partner schools, our partner teachers, and networks just like the one that we're all here a part of today, sharing this learning experience. So I do have the tendency to bleed black and gold. Like you all, I miss my students. This has been a really, again, just unprecedented is the best word I think to use. Time where we are all just navigating this idea of staying connected. So this is, just want to brag on a group. This is a group of future elementary educators. This is a group of our juniors celebrating the end of the fall semester. And this group is now more than ever so fired up to join their host schools next year, where they will serve as student teaching interns. So I miss them, they miss the fields, they miss the opportunity to connect with students. So like you, they are counting the days so we can get back to being in the business of connecting heads and hearts and teaching and learning with our K through 12 learners. So I thought this was a really pertinent headline. It popped on one of my news feeds earlier this week, but there was a small update yesterday. This is through the USA Today. I get you can certainly still subscribe to the paper, but this was part of the online feed that they had. What an intriguing question, one that I'm sure that we have all asked ourselves over the past 6 to 7 weeks. So what schools will look like when we reopen? Is this going to be scheduled days at home, more online learning, lots of hand washing, social distancing? There's going to be so many different parts to our new schooling process when we return, that the opportunity to really think about those changes and what these changes mean for school culture and what these changes mean for us as educators. I think this headline speaks to what a lot of us are probably feeling right now. So even though there's so much uncertainty, even though there's so much, it can be difficult to even think ahead, have a concept of what that could possibly look like in our schools. I hope today that we'll maybe find a silver-ish lining to so much of this rapid change, so many of these unanswered questions. And as we do look at some of the opportunity to think about a silver-ish lining, maybe we can find some small windows to break the default settings that too often define our practice as administrators, that too often define our practice as educators. And so that's really what we're going to try to hone in on today, the idea of breaking default settings. Well, talking about change and advocating for change and thinking how cool change could be is one part of getting to a place where we can think through change. But in fact, we've got to go one step further. We really need a method and we need a mindset. And we'll talk about both almost interchangeably because these two really do go together, the method and the mindset. But even if you don't take away anything about the method itself today, I hope this idea of a design-inspired mindset will stay with you for some time to come. So this slide then is a fantastic way to present the method that is design thinking, a 5-step process that we're going to go through somewhat closely today. The 5 steps: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. So that's the method part. But as we really dive into the method, we're going to try to really wrap our heads around what the mindset that's needed to really move through this process. This is one of my favorite definitions for design thinking. Design thinking, I want us to use this common language to define what that process, that method and mindset really looks like. Let's look at it like this. This is an opportunity need finding through empathy that leads to innovation. Now, I know innovation can sometimes feel like a big word, and when we think about innovation, maybe we think about major changes, the iPhone, any other huge, Zoom is an innovation. So many different things that seem just huge. How are these the types of changes that you're asking me to make today? Not at all. In fact, we're going to talk about how the smallest changes can actually be the most innovative. But to get there, we start with empathy. So when we think about transitioning from maybe a traditional style of leadership and instead thinking from a design-inspired place, this is going to be a key question that I'll challenge you as educational leaders to really think about. So how might we use time and resources differently to impact our students? Am I getting a little, am I unstable here? Is my connection okay, Kendra? Kendra, am I breaking up? Am I back? Is it okay, Kendra?
Yeah, it was a little bit unstable there for a second, but I'm hearing you fine right now.
Okay, back on. Okay, great. I apologize, everyone. My internet has been, well, that's been a learning lesson in and of itself. I thought I had great internet, and I think that I probably have not great internet. So anyway, back to the slide here. So this idea of using time and resources differently. So not just relying on the way that we have always managed our time during the school day, not just always thinking about resources in the same way, simply because that's how we've thought of resources before. So as we dive into this concept of need finding through empathy to get to innovation, keep this key question in mind. How can we use time and resources differently to affect our students or whoever that end user is? So perhaps for some of our administrators on the call, thinking about the end user is your more engagement with families and communities. Maybe it's different types of engagement with the central administration office. Maybe the end user for you is your teaching community. Maybe it's your other professional staff in the building. So students here, I'm using that certainly to speak to, I think, collectively everyone, but you can substitute whoever that audience is in for students. So when we do think about that key question, that moves us from what is to what could be. So again, I'm going to go back here real quick. So how might we use time and resources differently? If we can hone in on that answer, that brings us to a place where we move from what we're doing right now, default settings, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with all default settings, but let's really stretch our boundaries. Let's really figure out how we could move to what could be, especially if that will impact our students or our teachers differently. So if we do engage in this process of design thinking from both a method and a mindset standpoint, we really should achieve two overarching goals. This should be an opportunity to empower teachers, administrators, even students. So we'll, at the very end of the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about how modeling this mindset impacts student performance. So we want to empower teachers, administrators, students to examine school culture. For some, it might be a process of re-examining if you've continued to engage in some of these opportunities to seek change, find places where you can make some small tweaks to get to that innovation. But we want people to feel empowered by this process, to not shy away from the idea of innovation, because again, innovation I think can sometimes sound maybe a little bit too big for what we think that we have control of. The second part here, and this is so critical, and this is where the empathy piece is going to come in hugely. So we want to design student experiences or teacher experiences, family experiences, again, kind of fill in the blanks there. We want to design these experiences based on actual need, not just our perception of their need. And I'll share several stories about my own experiences implementing design thinking as a mindset and a process with some of my college students. And it really, as someone who studies design thinking and follows this, the work within this realm very closely, it was amazing to me how many actual needs I was overlooking and was not at all meeting their perceived needs. So I'll share some stories as we go. You know what, that probably brings me to a good spot though. As you all have questions or comments or things that if we need to pause, stop, please do use the chat box. I'm so thankful that Kendra is managing that for me. So Kendra knows that she is welcome to share any of those questions or any of those curiosities at any time. So please feel free to type, give us a message, give us a question, and we would be more than happy to answer that. So diving back in, and I'll go back to where we were. So we're moving from, let's talk about actual need and not just perceived need. So design thinking then has been a process that businesses, that companies that we're very familiar with have famously used to get to better experiences for their end users. Hopefully some of these logos look familiar. So you've got Uber, you think about Netflix, Airbnb, even Disney. So these are companies that have famously used this process of need finding through empathy to get to innovation. And we could talk all day about the different types of innovations that these companies have sought out to provide a better experience for their end users. But I think that, you know, as we consider the innovation that they have brought, they have really created some changes to our society. So what if we could take a similar approach with education? What if we could take a similar approach in thinking about the experiences we provide students, families, communities, in the same way that the Walt Disney Company manages the way that they engage people in the lines as people are waiting for rides. That's an example of design thinking in action. So this is not a new concept. It is, though, a concept that we have traditionally borrowed from more of a business-centered community. However, there's several examples that I can give you from the world of education where we already see that design thinking is making a big impact. I will make sure to follow up with everyone with some resources, some websites for you to check out. The Shadow a Student Challenge, we're going to come back to this here in a bit, but this is one of the most out-front examples of design thinking in education, where we saw there's a challenge where anyone can sign up to actually work through this process of following a day in the life of a student. So actually walking the walk, talking the talk, each changing hour with your students and really determining what their needs are. So we'll come back to this example, and I'm going to introduce you to Assistant Principal Ritter, who took the student challenge, the Shadow a Student Challenge. This is a really fantastic example as well. Bethany Hill is a principal in Arkansas. She is famously known for who needs a principal's office. Instead, she decided to have a traveling office, which meant that she put on a fanny pack, grabbed her binder or whatever resources that she needed to carry, and she moved towards this idea of changing the entire default settings of what we know about principals' offices. So there's a fantastic video I can share with you all as a follow-up, but a great example of design thinking where she was meeting the needs of her teachers who felt like she wasn't as accessible as they needed her to be from behind an office door. Pretty neat. Here's a couple of other examples. So the student-led parent-teacher conference. I'm not sure if these are perhaps practices that are happening in your districts. And I recognize there's some constraints to these types of big changes. This would probably be a big change. And yet you do see the idea of asking the students, what could we do differently to better meet your needs? And this particular video that I can again share after the presentation, it's fascinating to see what the light bulbs that really trigger in the administrators' heads when they see the students talking about these very small changes. Just a couple of more. Seating. So switching up seating arrangements. This is not a new concept, but how we get there, we can apply the methodology of design thinking to create this much more innovative style. I recognize that there's definitely a financial commitment to this seating. This looks like a very beautiful space here. Nonetheless, financial commitment aside, are there some small tweaks that these teachers made and could have made even without any potential funding? One more, this is one of my favorite examples. So a cafeteria designed for me. This website, we could do an entire webinar on just this website alone. Oh, I think there's my internet. Kendra, can you hear okay?
Now I can. It was shaky there for a second.
I apologize. So this website is a fascinating look at how the IO lab, which is actually the birthplace of design thinking, they came in and started to talk to students about what can we do differently to provide a better experience in the cafeteria. So it's a fascinating look at the design thinking process from empathy all the way to test, which is that final step. Oh, one last one. I forgot I used this one too. And this will take us right into empathy. Perhaps some of you may remember it was about, I want to say 2015, the name Kyle Schwartz might sound familiar. She's a third grade teacher in Denver, Colorado, who asked a very simple question: what I wish my teacher knew. She asked her students to tell her what she was missing, what she could do to help them have a better experience, not only with their learning in the academic environment, but how they're connecting with their peers. Here's two examples of what, when she decided to think through a need-finding lens, using empathy to get there. So I wish my teacher knew sometimes my reading log is not signed because my mom is not here too much. I wish my teacher knew how much I miss my dad because he got deported to Mexico. I mean, these are really empathetic responses that required a teacher to make a move using empathy to get there. So that's what brings us to really what the inspiration that I hope that you'll take away here today. So this is the design thinking methodology. I shared this a little bit different version on another slide. A couple of things that I want to note before we go through some of these steps. So the process in and of itself is actual, it's not linear. So even though you see that Empathize, Define, Ideate seem to have this sequential presentation, in fact, as you practice design thinking, or as you start design thinking for the first time, you may find that after you discover some actual needs that your students have, you may jump right to ideate and then go back to define. So I just don't want people to feel constrained by any type of a linear model. There's going to be a lot of fluctuation throughout the process. So today, though, we're going to focus on this first phase, inspiration. I think given our setting here, our setup, I think this makes the most sense to think about practicing here as a group. So with that, then, we're going to take a look at a bit of a design challenge. And this is where I want you all to really think about what are some of the small changes that you've been maybe processing in your head, especially now in this new normal that we're all navigating. What are some of those ideas maybe that you have already thought about from a place of empathy? So we're going to focus on empathize and define as a part of this mini design challenge. So I'm going to give you guys a few tools to use to maybe tease out some of those ideas that you've already been thinking about from the standpoint of how can we go from what is to what could be. Let's think about breaking those default settings. So when it comes to empathy or empathizing as our first step to the method, this is a major commitment to the mindset as well. As educators, as people who are in a helping profession of social science, I know that we are all hardwired for empathy. Teachers may be the most hardwired for empathy of any professional out there. But this is a chance to really begin that moving towards innovation by tapping into that empathy. So it's not just considering the other person's perspective or stepping into a day in the life of. That's part of it, and we're going to see that here in just a second. But we want to really learn about our audience members, their motivations, their fears, their dreams, the pace of learning, is it too slow, is it too fast? So this is really thinking about empathy even more deeply than just that sharing of a perspective with your end user. So I mentioned earlier the Shadow a Student Challenge. So this is Assistant Principal Ritter, and this is her middle school student, Alan. And so Assistant Principal Ritter, and I'll send the link to you guys to view this actual clip from the PBS NewsHour. Assistant Principal Ritter followed Alan a day in the life of, and it was fascinating. I mean, it didn't even take her to go through two of the classes with Alan to realize that his motivation, or I should say lack of motivation, came from the fact that he had no choice in his day. So he was moving from class to class to class, like many of our students probably are, and at no point, the way that she describes it, did Alan ever have an opportunity to choose how his day starts. They start in PE. Alan talks, and Assistant Principal Ritter learns that Alan would rather start his day in a content area class, but he wasn't given that choice. So by empathetically stepping into Alan's world, she learned so much more about how he would like to be in a woodworking class, but instead he's in 3 hours of math back to back to back. And Assistant Principal Ritter admitted she has no idea how students are managing their days from the standpoint of managing their energy, because she was wiped out by the time that they got to lunch. So it took that empathetic connection, stepping into his world, yes, but also, let me go back to my slide here, but also seeing his motivations, what he dreamed to be a part of, what he was fearful, all of those different affective connections that she was able to make. So it's an insightful clip, and it's also really neat to see that she grades herself and her school culture in a certain way before she takes the challenge, and then she gives herself much lower grades after taking the challenge in terms of school culture and actually creating intrinsic motivation for students. So the empathy part of the design challenge, or just anytime you're using this methodology, I encourage you to use this tool. This is an empathy map. And an empathy map you can draw out just like this. You can certainly adapt it to what would work well for you. But this is an opportunity for us to, as we empathetically step into the world of our students, our teachers, this is an opportunity for us to organize what we're observing about their experience, and then what we're inferring about their experience. So we can organize our thoughts in these 4 quadrants, and in doing so, that hopefully helps us to get to a place where we are more closely identifying the issue at hand. So this is where their true need finding comes in. It allows us, again, to think through everything that we've observed, for instance, about Alan's day, everything that we know based on what he did, what he said. But then we can also dig even deeper to get to the innovation that we're ultimately looking for by creating some statements around what we think Alan is what's going in his head and what we think Alan is feeling. So an empathy map can be a really useful tool. So that's where I want to leave the empathy piece and move to the define. So remember, we're thinking about the inspiration part of this methodology, and empathy is the first piece and define is the second. So when we think about defining the issue at hand, or this opportunity to make some changes, this is a really useful tool, a point of view statement. So this is a chance for us to say, okay, fill in the blank. Alan, for example, is a 6th grade student who, and then you can plug in what his needs are based on this concept of the problem that you're solving for in a world that is, and fill in the blank, is too concerned about moving from class to class on a default setting schedule, or in a world that has not identified student choice or has not prioritized student choice, in a world that has not connected student choice and intrinsic motivation. So when you think about moving from, I'm going to go back, an empathy map, or what do you do with all of these different thoughts and observations and bullet points that you might put on such a tool as the empathy map, this is where you start to define the issue using this point of view statement, so that you are truly using your observations, your inferences from an empathy standpoint to move into identifying the problem that you are trying to change, the default setting that you are trying to break. So this is where, let's take some time to work through this. I want you all to feel like that you can at least talk with your colleagues, that you can at least bounce some ideas off of one another. And so we're going to do a very mini design challenge and think through steps 1 and steps 2, empathy and define. So here's what we're going to do. So Kendra, we're getting ready to do our breakout rooms here. So I want you to imaginatively step into into the world of one of your students or teachers or folks on your administration team, anyone of that, whoever that end user is for you. And I want you to think about the actual need that you observe or infer. And in doing so, I want you to come up with your point of view statement, okay? So again, we're gonna try to think through imaginatively the world of your students, your teachers, the actual need that you need to, what actual need do you observe or infer, and then try to plug that into the point of view statement. I'm gonna go back to my slide here where you can maybe take a note of what this point of view statement is. And in doing so, here's the game plan. So as you all maybe take notes of the point of view statement, Kendra is gonna break you up into some breakout rooms, which we think will be a really cool opportunity for maybe to bounce some ideas off of one another. Maybe you're just sharing who your end user is. Maybe you're just sharing an idea that you've always wanted to experiment with, given what you know about your students' actual needs. So there's no right or wrong way to interact as a group. And we also recognize that group members will probably not have met each other unless you get lucky and there's someone in your district that you are connecting with. So no pressure. We just thought this would be a fun way to see if we can come up with either a point of view statement or if we can just start to tap into what might some of those actual needs be and who is that end user that you're thinking about, okay? So I'd also like to apologize if everyone perhaps heard my director of security. That would be my 5-year-old French bulldog who is currently running around after the surprise lawn team that's outside mowing. So I apologize if the director of security, he was barking there for a minute. So Kendra, if you want to go ahead and break everybody out into groups, and then we're gonna circle back in, yeah, let's circle back in just 3 minutes then, Kendra. All right, great, thank you. Here we go.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Hi. Just saw you asked for help. I'm not sure I can help you, but I joined just in case.
Hi, Kendra. I pressed that button because I wasn't seeing anyone for a while.
Oh, okay. Y'all good now?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Let me share my screen here. All right. Well, everyone, I hope that you had at least a little bit of a chance to maybe share some ideas with some colleagues, with some fellow educators. Would anybody like to share maybe what you chatted about? Any thoughts? And I might have to, I was in a breakout room with Curtis. I may bring Curtis in. Curtis, I know that's not the best practice to call on people by name, but did anybody want to share?
If anyone wants to share, just put it in the chat box and I can unmute you.
And while maybe some folks are thinking about sharing their ideas or, you know, how they might adapt the point of view statement, Curtis, if you're out there.
I'm trying to find him. There he is. Okay. He is unmuted, I believe.
Curtis, would you mind sharing? I really would appreciate it. I think that your idea will help also, will help people think about this and how this is happening in their own districts and classrooms.
Yeah, so I'm going to actually be, I work with NEE right now, but next year I'll be assistant principal at Shepherd Boulevard Elementary here in Columbia. And so I've been looking at all of this through the mindset of the students and connecting with the students. And I know my son, he's in 3rd grade, and 3 times a week he's been having Zoom sessions with his teacher. And I would say on a regular basis, about half the students in this class are in attendance. Definitely a handful of kids, 5 or 6, that have never been on with that I've seen. And so I worry about those students who I'm assuming don't have the access to be able to do those Zoom meetings. If this is something that, from what a lot of people are saying, is we're going to have another wave of this in the fall,
right? What
can we do as an educational institution to ensure that these students who don't have the online access or consistency at home to be able to, I guess, the structure at home to be able to get on it on a consistent basis? It's one of those 2 things.
Yeah.
What are things we can do educationally to try to help those students and make sure that they get the same educational opportunities as everyone else?
Wow, that's Curtis. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think this is an interesting example. I'm going to back up here. Actually, let me back here. Hang on. So the actual need that your students have, I think we could think about it in a few different ways. We might be able to observe that their actual need is technology. Maybe it's access to high-speed internet. Maybe it's access to some type of a device. Or you could infer that their actual need is connection, consistent connection with the teacher, or with a positive adult influence within that school community. So I think by using that point of view statement or the point of view principle, thinking through those actual needs is a great place as we start. So this is the next step, thinking about the ideation about, so we've got to figure out how do we move from having empathized with our students, thinking, actually defining the problem, defining the actual need, and then we want to move into this idea of brainstorming. And this sometimes can be the most challenging part, because too often our own default settings are to limit ourselves based on a yes, but mentality. And so as you think about brainstorming ideas, to really be an innovative, empathetic problem solver, remember to focus on brainstorming as an opportunity to say yes and instead of no or yes but or no but. And in doing so, your goal here with brainstorming is going to be to aim for a mix of these, what we call blue sky idea, and then also ideas that might be more grounded. So again, how are we going to problem solve around, in this case, what Curtis described, more consistent Zooming with students, but then also the connection, addressing the real need for connection. So one of the tools that we use at this stage in design thinking from a method standpoint is a 3x3 grid. And you can, again, no idea is going to be too big, no idea is too small, but starting to organize your ideas based on some of them being more grounded. So maybe Curtis has a few initial thoughts of what he could maybe start by doing today as that new assistant principal to build a groundwork for more consistent connections. What are the blue sky ideas? What are these things that maybe we've never even thought of trying? Or what are some other districts doing? Or what's something that you know would have an impact on students, but the only reason that you have not put it out there is because it fits into the yes, but category. Put it out there. Think of it as an opportunity to say yes, and here's how we would approach this blue sky idea, instead of just eliminating it because it seems too hard or it's constrained by this idea of but. So ideate, and this is an opportunity to build teams within your school communities to really, it doesn't have to be a 3x3 grid. It can be as big a grid as you would like it to be. The research will say that within a 9 idea grid, that you should be able to walk away with a few action items that you could try to move towards some innovation with whatever problem that you're trying to solve. So I recommend using at least 9 ideas, but feel free to consider more and more ideas as you go. So that's the third step in the design thinking process. This is a really important step. Prototype. So this is where you're going to want to build or consider creating some type of a visual representation of what your idea, what your plan is. So this is where, think about picking that one really great idea off of your ideation grid and instead bringing it into, making it come to life using some type of a prototype. Now, if you're thinking, wait a minute, is she asking us to build like an actual 3D model of some sort? Maybe, sort of depends on what your innovation is that you're reaching for. The prototypes, though, that I have found most useful in my own practice with design thinking, revised syllabuses, revised calendars, a revised statement of whatever my learning, whatever the goal statement is for a particular course, recreating that learning statement so it's not just this textbook way of approaching a course, but it actually creates some energy, some vibrance, some fun the minute the students read about what the course is going to be. As you think about some of the default settings in some of the courses or some of the syllabi that you've probably seen, some of those course objective statements or some of those course description statements can be pretty boring. So what if we step back and rewrite that as a prototype and use that as an opportunity to make a better connection with our students? So a prototype or a visual representation, this can take the shape of many different models. It can be a written model. It can be something that you build. It can be anything that is going to take that brainstorming part of the design thinking process and bring that one step closer to the final step of test driving it. So before we move into that final step though, this is, I love this part of the prototyping process. It is so critical to build to learn. So build that syllabus statement or build that revised course calendar or build that revised whatever it is, build it to learn, but not to last. Because we still have to test drive this with our students or our teachers. We need to get feedback, and more feedback from our end users. So I think it's very easy to fall in love with the prototype that we've built. We've done all this need finding through empathy. We wrote a point of view statement to really identify the issue at hand. We did some awesome brainstorming. So I want to love the prototype. I want to love that first version of what I've changed. And in fact, you want to build it to learn more about the change, the innovation that you're trying to make. Not necessarily because this is going to be the part of this change process that lasts. So don't fall in love just yet, because our fifth process here is the test drive. So you need as much feedback from your end users as possible. Take that prototype and share it with people. Get their feedback, test drive it again, get more feedback, test drive it again. This last fall at Mizzou, I have a class with 300, which is really cool, 300 aspiring educators. And I decided to change how we conduct class on Thursdays. So instead of meeting as 300 on Thursdays, I decided that I was going to assign all of the students to these small groups. And the small groups were going to come to class for 20-minute intervals. So I was going to meet with the small group so I could touch base with them one-on-one, and then their small group would leave at the 20-minute mark, another small group would come in, another small group would come in, another small group would come in. After doing some conversations with the students to figure out that that was what they were, that was their actual need. I thought that my perception of their need was that they were fine just coming to a big 300-person class, and so I just conducted lectures like that. But when I talked to students about their actual needs, they wanted to have an opportunity to connect more one-on-one with me and meet some people in this class. So I thought that, so my prototype then was this new Thursday class where these groups were going to come in at 20-minute intervals. I built the prototype to last, and that was a big mistake. In fact, when I actually test drove the new Thursday concept, major failure really quickly. So it was confusing. Students couldn't remember what team they were on. Students couldn't remember what time they were supposed to come. So there were too many moving parts that actually meant that we wasted probably 4 Thursdays in a row before I knew that we needed to go back to the drawing board and try something else. I failed to test drive that new prototype. I just fell in love and decided that that was going to be how we do it. Instead, I should have built that to learn if that was going to meet their actual needs before making it a part of our class model. But instead, I just decided to go full force forward, and that was what we were going to do. In the end, we ended up with a different type of a hybrid. The 20-minute approach, students felt like that was not enough time, and it was a little bit too chaotic, too many students in and out. So we decided on a different type of rotation, bigger groups that came every other Thursday for a longer amount of time. So, and that got a lot of students much more connected to the class. So again, I can't emphasize enough, once you've got that beautiful idea that you pull off from your grid, really think about the prototype and then testing it before you scale it up, because you can create some tweaks and that will get you in a much better place to learn so that the final prototype is in fact what lasts. So test is going to be the last part of design thinking, and from a methods standpoint, but this is really where the mindset comes in again. This is, so one of the grandfathers, if you will, of the design thinking theory. So his name's Tim Brown out of Stanford. So this is one of my favorite quotes in his book, Change by Design. Fail often to succeed sooner. This is an opportunity for us to really think about the mindset that we are using to approach change, to approach innovation. When I failed with my Thursday experiment, I was really glad that I failed as quickly as I did in the semester. We did waste 4 Thursdays, make no mistake about it, but thankfully there are 16 Thursdays. So communicating that this is a part of the process with your students or with your end users, and modeling this, that you want to fail often so that we can succeed sooner. This is a really big, this is a part of the mindset that I think makes this so unique, that we are going into this recognizing that it is going to be okay to fail. And in fact, the more often we can fail, that will get us to a place of success much sooner. I shared with my students, I actually shared this image with them, which I hope will stick with many of them after I modeled this for those 300 students, that I too quickly fell into this assumption that my success, I was going to make that one change, I was going to roll it out, and we were going to hit all of the goals that we wanted to hit. I was going to solve all of the problems that I was trying to solve. But in fact, we had to get caught up in this messy middle. And then after we walked through another test drive, another prototype, another test drive, then we finally were able to get to the actual innovation that in fact did meet their needs. And it was pretty interesting, the course evaluations that I had that semester, some were pretty harsh because they had not necessarily connected with my mindset that I wanted to fail often so that we could succeed sooner. But the students who got this appreciated that I was upfront and transparent about why I was making changes and why I needed their partnership in the changes to make sure that we were going to hit success, knowing that success would be meeting their needs through innovation. So I also, just a quick headline also from Stanford, and this is what I mentioned in the beginning, this is a really important mindset for us as educational leaders, but such an important mindset for our students. So there was a recent study conducted at one of the partner schools at the Stanford College of Education that they partner with, and they actually found that 2 major questions were asked. They found the answers to these major questions about whether or not design thinking impacts our students. And here, let me show you. So this is a quote from the article that I just screenshotted on the other slide, and I'll share this with you all. So here are the 2 questions. But do design thinking strategies actually improve a student's performance? Perhaps more important, will students use those strategies outside of school? Before that particular study, both questions were hard to measure. Stanford is now conclusive in their data that says yes and yes. We see improved performance, and we also see that students now adapt those strategies outside of a school context so that they become more innovative, empathetic problem solvers. So again, we're using this to meet their actual needs, but in meeting their actual needs, we're modeling the behaviors, we're modeling the mindset that creates a better experience for our students as well. So that's a bonus win to all of this, in my opinion. So again, I'll share that study with you all. It's pretty fascinating what the researchers found. So we started with this question then, this idea of, is there a silver lining to what we're all experiencing with this COVID-19 crisis? What could that silver lining be? Is it an opportunity to break default settings? I hope we've thought through some, again, methods, mindset that will take you to a place of feeling more confident in breaking default settings. But I wanted to share one other quote to hopefully inspire that mindset now more than ever. So this is a quote that I saw this pop up on Twitter. Sean Slade, who's the senior director of global outreach for ASCD. ASCD might be an organization that you all follow as well. But this quote was in one of his tweets this week. If there is an upside, and there are many to this crisis, it's that we are all having enough time to reassess what we do and why. From this perspective, the COVID-19 crisis may well signal a reappraisal of our education systems and processes and a newer, more human approach to education. Design thinking is all about human-centered design. So what's that silverish lining? I think Sean Slade really hit the nail on the head, that this is an opportunity to go back and re-examine our why. And if our students or teachers or colleagues, families are not at the very center of what we do, well, let's get back to that place of empathy, move to define, ideate, test, or prototype, and then test. And let's find some new innovations to really make sure that we are taking the most human approach to education. So real quick, I know we're winding down here. Here's 3 things I hope that you will try today or tomorrow, or just whenever you have some time, to start thinking through some examples in your own lives where design thinking could be useful. So start by asking what if. So this gets back to that question, how might we as teachers use time and resources differently? Another great question to ask in that same vein is, what if I tried to adapt my schedule just a little bit differently? Would the outcomes be different? What if I gave students more choice to start their day? What if I, instead of bringing all of my students in a Zoom call at once, what if I did say, you two are partners, we're gonna meet for 10 minutes on Wednesday. You two are partners, we're gonna meet for 10 minutes on Wednesday. There's all sorts of what if possibilities. So by asking what if, you are choosing to open yourself up to those possibilities. Choose the possible. Ask what if and see what follows. Empathy cannot be understated here. So the opportunity to walk their walk, if you can walk their walk to get to the actual heart of their needs, you will find that the rest of design thinking unfolds almost seamlessly. As soon as you walk their walk and establish a stronger connection with their actual needs, you will be empowered to move through the method and maintain the mindset. And then lastly, this is one of my favorites. I have used this probably no fewer than 10 times this week in my own meetings with colleagues as we try to navigate how we're going to conduct classes in the fall. Move at any conversations, possible innovations from a yes and instead of a yes but or a no but mentality. This is another opportunity to really practice mindset. So even if you are not, if you decide that, the steps to design thinking, that might just be too far out of your reach right now, and that's okay. Everyone is managing so much. Use this number 3 to really just maybe challenge your own mindset so that we don't just lean on the default settings that we too often fall back on. This is an opportunity to really think about some new ideas as you try to not only improve improve your classroom community, your school community, but the innovation piece comes along with that. So that's really all. I think we've got like 60 seconds. I appreciate all of your time so much, and I do apologize for a few of the probably the background noise was not the greatest, but I know we're all just doing the best that we can. I wanted to also wish you all a very, very happy Teacher Appreciation Week. I know that starts on Monday. I hope that your communities and your colleagues, all of the different families that you impact, so happy Teacher Appreciation Week to all of you. I don't know if we have time for questions, but I don't, Kinder, did anything come in? I'd be happy to address.
There hasn't really been anything that comes in, but if anyone has any last minute questions, just put those in the chat box.
And I do want to be cognizant of people's time. It won't offend me at all if you log off, but I'm also happy to answer any questions that you may have. And if questions pop up later, send an email. I would be happy to connect you with some specific resources, or I'd be happy to do some brainstorming with you individually. Let's think about some of these, what design thinking calls wicked problems or grand challenges. Let's think about some of those together, and I might not have the answer, but I definitely can work with you to think through the different steps of the method, and then together we can both practice the mindsets that is design thinking as well. So please be in touch anytime. And then I will certainly follow up with some resources. These are the references that I used to work through this presentation, but this is a very short list of all of the design-inspired resources that for teachers, school leaders. In particular, this second one on the list, Design Thinking for School Leaders, 5 Roles and Mindsets That Ignite Positive Change, one of my favorite all-time books. We require every College of Education student to have this book. It's awesome. So I really appreciate your time today, everyone. I appreciate the innovation that is Zoom that was able to bring us all together. And I wish you all a fantastic, relaxing weekend. And please, I hope I will hear from some of you all. Would love to have that conversation.
Yes, thank you, Leigh.
Yeah.
Thank you, Leigh, and thank you to everyone for joining. We will be sending out an email to everyone with a link to watch, and then with some of the resources, Leigh, that you shared with some of those links, just so everyone can have a copy of all of this information. It was great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great